And that is the importance of our work. That we can't do the whole thing without our O&M technicians out there keeping these systems up and running. So that has to happen regardless of whatever fire is blazing in Washington. So that's my appeal to companies that are struggling to find the resources and to find the time and attention to put towards these programs, is that in a way it may seem less urgent, but it actually is not.
Hello, and welcome back to the Future of CRE Sustainability. I'm your host, Sean Swentek. I'm joined today by one of my favorite people in the industry, Amanda Bybee, CEO of Amicus O&M Cooperative. Amanda, hello.
Hi, thank you for having me, Sean.
Thank you so much for joining me. I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you today. We're down here at Solar Plaza, Asset Management North America in beautiful San Diego. I'm looking behind me going, I wish I was outside. It's so nice today. What did you hope to get out of this conference? This is the last day. What have you gotten out of it? What surprised you? What's been exciting for you at this show?
Well, this is my favorite conference of the year. It's such a great place to interact with the people who really run this end of our industry, the asset managers, owners, and the O&M providers. And I'm really excited to be here this year to talk about the progress that we've made since last year's show in terms of building out a new standard for how we train and refer to solar and BESS O&M technicians, and talking about the training program that the O&M Cooperative has been working on.
What is the big change from last year to this year?
So last year, I was recruiting people to come participate on our advisory committee so that we had a really broad spectrum of perspectives and we could engage that human trait of feeling more invested in something when they have a chance to help build it. So we were adding people to the advisory committee who would then contribute to defining this framework for solar and BESS O&M technicians to give them a whole professional development pathway. And the tricky part of this is getting everyone to agree on where the lines are drawn between levels and really where the line begins.
Yep.
So some companies, for example, were using terminology like Tech Zero as the entry-level technician. I don't know. I think that's a little insulting. I don't want to be a zero myself. So I advocated that we just start it with Tech 1. And then we have a 4-level framework that defines what you need to know before a level, what you learn during a level, and then what competencies we will evaluate at the end of a level. And so where you draw the line between Tech 1 and Tech 2 and Tech 2 and Tech 3 is a little bit of, there's some negotiating to see how the individual companies that are currently using a structure similar to that and building consensus around it. So Amicus O&M Cooperative conducted a whole process to build consensus. And we defined this framework and we wrote out a curriculum outline for companies that if they wanted to develop their own training, like here's a recommended set of learning objectives. And then we took that work and we shared it with our friends at the Solar Energy Industries Association. And they used it as the basis for their forthcoming ANSI standard from the American National Standards Institute. And they did their whole ANSI process, and we are complete with the process, and we are just waiting for the final stamp from ANSI, and the standard should be published in the next couple of weeks.
That is exciting.
It is. It represents a lot of work by a lot of people. And it also represents the very first time our industry has tried to coalesce around a structure like this. And it's going to be so important to help change the narrative around what it means to become an O&M technician. It gives these techs a pathway to say, oh, now I know how to advance in my career. I know what trainings I need to take, what I'm expected to know and be able to do. We've never had that before. And I think it's an important step in the maturation of our industry to define this and ensure that it gets implemented out in the field. So that's the next big part of the work, is helping companies bring this to life through real training programs, through HR policies where they adopt this and create some accountability for the technicians. So there's a whole process that we embark on now. But the first step was really important because it had never been done before.
Well, thank you for taking that step. Amanda, if we take a step back, can you talk about what Amicus Cooperative is, the how and why it came to be? Because I think some people may not know that.
Amicus O&M Cooperative was founded in 2016 with the help of a grant from the Department of Energy. And the idea was to create a network of vetted O&M field service providers that we could support by giving them tools and templates to use and help them create more consistency in the way that they approached O&M work. 2016, it was still very decentralized, Wild West.
Yes.
So with Amicus O&M Cooperative, we've built out this set of tools and templates. We do an extensive amount of knowledge sharing and creating a space where companies can come in and say, hey, I'm struggling with this thing. Has anybody else encountered it? What did you do? And we brainstorm solutions together. We've also been working on building out a training program, sort of as the complement to the standard for solar and BESS O&M technicians. And so these are the things that the cooperative does to help support its member companies in being safe, efficient, and profitable.
I love that. A lot of our listeners are end asset owners, meaning they're a corporate entity, a commercial real estate entity. They might have a few industrial warehouses with solar on the rooftops. When they think about Amicus, what is the benefit to them that this organization exists?
So we are all focused on supporting the operations of these companies so that they are safe, efficient, and profitable. I think that matters to clients to know that they are part of a community where they can seek help. And there's so much value in that consistency. The idea had always been that if we had a client that was working with multiple member companies, if they're all using the same contract templates and the same software out in the field and the same reports that are being generated, it helps everything just be more accessible. If you're working with multiple different providers and each of them has a different report, every time you get it, you have to sort of reacquaint yourself with what it's covering. And so the value of consistency is just in knowing what to expect and in being familiar with it. So when you're trying to absorb information, your brain's not distracted by, a new format or a new set of, new scope of work that I'm trying to follow up on. So I think that's meaningful. But then the training piece is also a really important thing for clients to know that the people who come out to work on their sites are fully trained and competent and are far less likely to have safety issues, far more likely to be able to fix problems more quickly, fewer return visits, et cetera. So I think that the value of the services that we offer is clear, of course, for the companies themselves, but really should also be meaningful to their clients.
You're building trust in the industry, which is vital. So you've been bringing to AMNA this week this plan, this idea around this technician training, around the standardization. What has the reception been like? What kind of conversations have you been having? What are you hearing from the market?
All in all, very positive feedback. I think a lot of folks here do recognize the need for this. At the employer level, we've been hearing quite a lot about the labor shortage of O&M technicians. And one of the things that can happen with a labor shortage is that you end up with people moving from one position to another, lured by the promise of more pay or a promotion. But that's really being driven by desperation more so than by what they have earned. And so with the standard, you're going to have an objective measurement to say, where do you fall in this spectrum of knowledge? What are you ready for in terms of additional responsibility? What types of tasks can you lead safely and teach to others? Whereas beforehand, they could swagger around and just call themselves whatever they wanted to. And there was very little framework to substantiate their claim. So I think from an employer perspective, having that in place may help with some of the labor inflation that we've seen. But also for the techs themselves, it's going to give them that clear pathway to get to where they need to be to really command the price and the responsibility that they seek. So
I love that. Training is one of the most important things in any business. It costs money. It's a process. How do you, for a company that's large and has a large workforce and they're trying to think about how to approach training at scale, what's your advice for how to institute that?
So this is the big work from here on out. First of all, if you're an existing company with an existing crew, they all have a self-perception of what they know and where they should fall in this framework. And I think it can be difficult to say, we have to sort you into a framework now that you have been unfamiliar with. And the techs themselves, there were technicians at the table as we designed it, but these particular ones may not have been. So for them to adopt these ideas and become comfortable with the new framework is a sort of a change management process. And I think my advice to companies that need to put this into place now is to, first of all, start the conversation by reassuring everyone that their pay will not change.
Yeah.
Because that is the first thing that will put people on edge and make them a flight risk. And the last thing we would want is to actually spark a wave of attrition because you were trying to implement the program.
Yeah.
But bringing people on board with this, explaining the value of it to all of the parties at the table, and then asking them to go through the training through one of two ways. If they are a senior technician that already knows everything that would be covered in a Tech 1 training, you can ask them to go through the training through the lens of an instructor, because the senior technicians are going to have to train the young ones. And it's very helpful for them to know what material is being covered and how they can reinforce that when they're out doing the field training that complements our online training. If they're truly new, then they come through the program as a student and with the lens of actually learning the material that's being taught. But either way, it has the effect of getting everybody on the same page, getting them using the same vocabulary terms, and getting on the same page with how we approach the work, particularly around safety. So there's a lot of advantages to that, but my favorite other piece of advice to companies is to take the vision, the grand vision of what you want to try to do, and break it down into the smallest bite-sized first step that you can take that makes people feel comfortable with saying, yes, we can do this. And, call it a pilot program, call it what you will, but engage those first few as the vanguard, helping you assess this program and helping think through how you can implement it as a company. The one other thing that I'll say, Sean, is that we're hearing a lot of concern right now about the volatility and uncertainty in our industry. And we've
not just our industry.
Well, not just our industry, fair enough. But myopically, we are all focused on what is before us. And even just this week, we've had really disruptive news about new tariffs coming down the pipe. And I think what's hard for companies when they're reading this, they don't know how it's going to affect their companies. This is like a burning fire on their laps, and rightfully so. These are very impactful issues that are flying at us constantly all the time. And it's very easy when you're distracted by that and when these burning issues demand your attention to put training and that sort of stuff, these programs, over to the side. I don't think anybody would characterize training as a nice to have. You have to have it. Because the last thing you need on top of the burning fires on your lap is a safety issue or an injury or an OSHA violation. So, those are real threats as well. But they can feel less pressing when you have this new, ember flying at your face. So I think I want to encourage companies to not let that fall, not let the training piece go by the wayside. It does take time and energy to stand that sort of thing up and to do it well. But if you don't do it, there are also really negative consequences, particularly if somebody gets hurt. It's the last thing any of us wants. We want all of our people to go home safe at the end of the day.
Yes.
So the training component cannot wait. It cannot be sidelined forever. And my hope is that, companies can allocate the right resources, put the firefighter on the burning fire and then have somebody else take point on building up the training program. Because even when our industry faces uncertainty, the asset management and O&M end of our industry is the most insulated from these policy changes. So yes, they're impactful. They are going to hit us even down here, in terms of the supply chain availability and what have you. But our work must continue. All of the projections, the keynote speaker, we know that in order to mitigate the worst effects of the climate crisis, we have to install more renewable energy. And we can. But when they show us those numbers about the installation figures, it assumes that the previously installed systems are operational. And that is the importance of our work. That we can't do the whole thing without our O&M technicians out there keeping these systems up and running. So that has to happen regardless of whatever fire is blazing in Washington. So that's my appeal to companies that are struggling to find the resources and to find the time and attention to put towards these programs, is that in a way it may seem less urgent, but it actually is not.
I love your advice for how to attack this like huge project in these tiny, it reminds me of like, how on earth do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So you talked a little bit, you mentioned the term BESS earlier. So solar obviously has been the driver industry. Adjacent technologies like BESS and EV charging are really growing. How are you approaching training specific to those categories versus solar training? Or how much crossover is there? What have you learned as you've developed these other programs?
So the standard addresses both solar and battery energy storage systems. And the way that it's laid out is for each level, we identify the core activities that an O&M technician needs to learn how to do. And that is regardless of the market segment that they're working in. And then at the end, it does have specific call outs for residential, C&I, utility, and BESS technology. So, really there's a lot of commonality in the tasks themselves and the tools that you need to use, whether you're working on solar or BESS or even EV charging stations. So we start there with like that core learning and then break it up over time.
Very cool. Has there been any interesting technology or everyone's talking about AI and then automation, all these things. Is there anything you're seeing adjacent to the training space, maybe at this conference or just in general, that is exciting you about the industry?
I have mixed feelings about
I thought you might.
AI. I can certainly, it's like the internet, right? There is such potential for good and there is so much potential for harm.
Yeah.
And within the training program, we are using AI selectively to help expedite certain tasks, getting an outline together or, a first draft that then the humans can work on and ensure it's accurate and clear cut and easy to follow. And we're seeing this, great promise of AI and all the softwares and the robotic dogs and the machines. And, I think that's exciting.
Yeah.
I am not personally of the persuasion that we will do this without humans.
Yeah.
And I see that, so in the end, I think the best outcome will be a hybrid where we deploy the robots and the AI for the tasks that they're suited to with human supervision and intervention as needed. I also think that there are dangers that we don't yet fully understand by turning so much responsibility and decision-making over to an algorithm.
Yeah.
And in many cases, it may be better, right? Yeah. They may make more rational decisions than us flawed human beings will. But I'm not ready to turn it all over to the AI overlords quite yet.
Yeah, I think that's wise. I think part of what I'm thinking about is this labor shortage that has existed for so long. Can AI play a role in helping us get more done with fewer people? I think it's interesting to see these automated installation machines now that exist in the field. It's like, does that free up people to do more O&M work? And I don't know if that's the answer, but maybe it helps us address some of the shortage.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, those are also jobs, right? And O&M jobs tend to be really good paying jobs.
Yeah.
And I want those jobs for humans.
Yeah.
We have experienced a chronic labor shortage, so maybe this is a way to help address it.
Yeah.
And we save humans for the harder corrective work. I had a conversation actually with one of the thought leaders in the AI space the other night, and he was telling us what their dogs can do. And I was like, oh, okay. That's news to me. It's kind of impressive, and it's also kind of
scary.
Yeah. Weird.
We'll move forward with great caution. Let's talk a little bit about actual O&M. I think the topic, especially for some listeners who might be more nascent in renewable space and maybe are just getting their first assets installed, if someone's buying a system outright or getting a loan and they're going to have this on their roof for 20, 30 years, how should they be thinking about the long-term care of that asset?
When you buy a car, how do you think about maintenance on your car?
I'm thrilled that it's usually included for a few years. And then after that, I know I'm going to have to plan for the maintenance of that or it's not going to run.
That's right. So the same needs to apply to solar.
Yeah.
We are putting an expensive asset on the roof or the ground. And leaving it in the elements, which are harsh, particularly, and ironically, the sun. So it is really important that we conduct regular routine inspections so that we can catch problems before they turn into really anything severe. I know it's a cliche, but the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yep.
I think about that saying a lot, because when we spend a little bit of money on these inspections and preventative and corrective maintenance, it avoids much greater issues over the long term. So, the top 3 reasons that I think people typically invest in O&M are for safety, especially if you have a roof-mounted system. You want to ensure that, the people and animals that travel around your building are safe. Performance. This is an investment, so of course you expect it to perform at a certain level. And warranty preservation. And some warranties stipulate that you have to do regular maintenance. And so you need to have it documented annual inspections or filter cleanings or what have you. That's what we typically put into the preventative maintenance category. Then if a technician's out doing an inspection and they find items that are broken and need to be repaired, that typically trips into corrective maintenance territory. And so you need to have a bit of a budget for each of them. The nice thing in most contracts is that your preventative maintenance is a standard fixed fee each year, whereas corrective maintenance is very often paid on a time and materials basis. So the budget may vary a bit year over year, but I think just as if you own a car, if it's the old kind of car and you had to do oil changes and air filter changes and the 100-point inspection, you knew that you needed to do that every 3,000 to 5,000 miles. Whereas with solar, it's typically an annual inspection. And I think when people forget about the maintenance and they don't budget for that, it sets up an odd dynamic where they may eventually realize that they need to do some maintenance, something breaks, heaven help us, something goes badly, and there's like damage done to the property. That tends to be pretty expensive at that point. And people resent it because not only are they dealing with damage, but they didn't have any of this in the budget. And so I think we are becoming savvier about that now. And when most buyers purchase a commercial scale system, they realize that there does need to be an operations and maintenance agreement that goes with it. Can I make one other point about this?
Please.
I think that there's a common misconception about the difference between a workmanship warranty and an O&M agreement. Because most installers and many states require them to offer a workmanship warranty agreement of a certain duration. 5 years is a pretty common length of time. Some commercial warranties are shorter. A warranty is there to backstop the labor and the installation of the product. So if a problem arises that is found to be from the original installation, the company will come and repair that at no charge. Nothing in a workmanship warranty is proactive.
Correct.
So coming out to do a preventative maintenance inspection, doing regular active monitoring of the performance of the system, none of those services are included in a workmanship warranty. And so you need both to really ensure that your system is going to operate optimally. And I think a lot of people feel that, oh, I've got a warranty, it's all good, I don't need anything else. It's not quite true.
Agreed, 100%. One of the other things I was thinking as you were talking an ounce of prevention and a pound of cure, it's like it's easy to do preventative maintenance against corrective maintenance in that scenario. But even ahead of that is this concept of like QA/QC. How much value do you place in that as like really that ounce of prevention for like reducing long-term O&M costs?
It is such an important step. We often talk about commissioning at the end of construction. And really QA/QC in an ideal world starts at the beginning of construction. And you have QA/QC inspectors coming out to a site on a regular basis to ensure that it is being built to code and to best practices. And if you can detect any issues in the construction phase at the beginning, that's way better. Having that golden row, they call it, where you have your top people build the first row, and then you train everybody else that this is how it should be. And specifically, this is how the connectors go together. This is how many threads you should see. This is how we manage the wires. The stuff which seems sort of elementary is often the stuff that gets broken and then causes problems later on down the line. So absolutely ensuring that you have that quality control process built in from the get-go is the way to go. Now, I will say the scale of the system often dictates how extensive your QC may be. If you're talking about like a 100 kilowatt rooftop system, you may just do most of that at the commissioning.
Yeah.
But for much larger systems, obviously the financials allow for more people on site to take care of that sort of thing and to make sure that the work is being checked regularly.
So Amanda, you talked earlier on about the maturity of our industry at this point, how much has changed over the last 10, 15 years. I spoke earlier this week with someone in the recycling part of the business. I'd love your thoughts on circularity, the idea of repowering, decommissioning, recycling. What are you seeing in that space, and how do you see your organization leaning into that?
I am so passionate about this topic. So thank you for the softball question. It's very exciting to start to see players in the recycling space who have real funding behind them and real know-how.
Yeah.
I think we've had a handful of companies in the past that were very well intentioned, but really struggled actually to bring this to scale and really even to adopt some of the safety and environmental practices that they need to have. So we are taking light year leaps in terms of maturity over the last 5 years. And I'm delighted to see it, because I really look at our role as O&M providers is everything from end of construction through the end of a system's life cycle. So that includes decommissioning.
Yep.
And I care very much that our industry not throw everything into a landfill. We are built on an environmental ethos.
Yep.
And so to do that feels like a betrayal of what we're really about. Until recently, though, we haven't had great options. And so some modules have ended up in the landfill. And that hurts me. But I think as we continue to march toward resource scarcity, there will come a point in time where it makes more sense to try to extract them from the materials that have reached their end of life and reuse them.
Yep.
And we're starting to see this happen. And the other thing that I'm hopeful for is that we can take a broad view on waste management. So we're starting to hear stories of systems being decommissioned. And if modules are coming off of an older site, but they're still functional, my hope is that we can also have some of those modules, test them, make sure they're sound, but then enter the secondary market.
Yes.
So that it's easier to find the odd module or two to repair an older system rather than having to scrap the whole thing. Because I think that's a short-sighted way to elevate our waste stream is to do premature decommissioning. So it's been a huge challenge and a pain in the neck to try to find legacy gear, because one of the unintended consequences that I like to talk about in solar is we love new technology. So, every year the modules came out with 5 or 10 more watts to them, or they came out bigger, or they came out with a new inverter, so there's been umpteen bajillion iterations of all of these products, and there's no massive warehouse anywhere with a pallet of each iteration lying around. So everybody has to sort of scrounge, beg, borrow, and steal to find, beg and borrow, to find...
No stealing.
No stealing. To find these legacy items. And if you can find a module or two to fix an old system and allow it to have another 5 or 10 years of life, that is vastly preferable to me than just taking it down.
Agreed.
So, some of the recycling companies, I had some conversations this week as well, they don't do that. They don't test the mods and then send them into the secondary market. And I understand why. There is certainly an important traceability factor of when a client says, I want to make sure that these are responsibly recycled. They don't want to discover that a pallet went awry. And I think that's fair. However, if everything just goes straight into recycling when it still had useful life, I feel like we're skipping that middle step. It's reduce, reuse, then recycle, right? So I really am optimistic that it will make it easier to keep older systems running in the end. But having these recycling groups, and many of them are not, they haven't achieved full circularity yet, but they're working toward it. And I love that. And I think that's going to be the answer, to making sure that we can truly be a sustainable industry. But, everyone has just been so focused on build as fast as we can for the last 25 years. It's taken a little while for us to realize that, there's this whole end of life process. I have spoken to people at conferences in years past where they think they're going to be paid for their equipment.
It's still worth something after 20 years, right?
Or that they'll be paid to recycle. And I think that's a good goal for us to aspire to, because once we really do achieve circularity, then there is going to be residual value. But for the time being and for the foreseeable future, it will cost money to recycle our equipment properly. And that's tough, because if you didn't build that into your financial pro forma in the beginning, realizing that you suddenly have this big bill to pay at the end is a hard pill to swallow. And landfilling it may feel cheaper, but I want to really challenge us to become savvier about that, to bake in some cost for decommissioning at the end, and challenge the recyclers to continue bringing down the cost. I think it is still too expensive. And when the price differential is too great, people will take the easier and less expensive route, which will ultimately not be good for our planet.
Well said. If you look 5-10 years in the future, Amanda, what is your wish, your vision, your prediction for where this market and this solar renewable industry will be? And maybe you can tie it to the training or the O&M side, or just maybe like if you have some crazy idea that you want to get out there. I love hearing what people see in the future.
My hope is that we continue to professionalize. I think one of the things that we've experienced, starting from the dirty hippies slinging solar in, Northern California to today, is that we have learned a lot from adjacent trades. And I think that's been a really positive influence on our industry, particularly around safety and training. And that's something that the conventional trades have done well. And I want us to continue learning from that. And I want us to accept that there is a cost to doing work safely, and that clients need to understand that they cannot just crush the cost down to the point that we are asking people to do unsafe things. So I want there to be a truce on that point, where the clients accept that it might cost a little more than they want, and the companies adhere faithfully to the safety practices that will keep our people whole. And so that's what I want to see, is that there's no more question about, do we send 2 people to this job? Yes, of course you do, because 2 people is much safer. And because that second person needs to be training as we're trying to build out the workforce to where it needs to be. And I think that, if we can all agree on these professional standards, it will relax some of this tension and some of the gray area and some of the maybe questionable decisions that get made, because all in the name of cost. And that would be my magic wand dream, is that we really continue to professionalize this and train our people to excellence. So that we have really clean builds that are properly quality controlled. And we have really professional O&M teams that go out and do their work efficiently. And we see the performance that we expected. I believe so much in the promise of this technology, but it is our job in the O&M industry to fulfill that promise. And that's what I want to continue striving toward.
I love that. It costs money to do safe, standardized work, but boy, it can get real expensive to do unsafe work by untrained people. So
yeah. Exactly. And it's an avoided cost, which is much more difficult to conceptualize than, I know what this training is going to cost me, and whooey, It's like, yes, but this bill is much bigger. But it's just hard to bake that in. No budgets include avoided cost. Somebody said this to me one day: you don't know when you don't die. And they were talking about statistics around pollution and how, you'll read pollution kills 7 million people a year. Well, if you remove the pollution and you don't die, you don't realize that you didn't die. And I think the same is true of any kind of avoided costs. You don't know when someone doesn't get hurt.
Well, that's a tricky one to keep in mind. I'm like,
I know. I kind of like chewing on
it. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you were like, gosh, I was hoping to be able to opine on this topic today?
We hit most of the things that I wanted to talk about. I think the drum that I want to beat right now is that these standards and the training that we're trying to bring to life in the marketplace are really important, but they will only be as good as they are adopted.
Yes.
And so that is the work of the coming years, is to help companies operationalize training and bake it into the day. And it takes buy-in from so many levels. It takes leaders of the company to allocate budget. It takes the HR department baking it into job descriptions and performance reviews and pay bands. It takes the managers reinforcing it and holding everybody accountable. It takes the scheduler looking for sites where they can bake in an hour to do dedicated, structured training. It takes the senior technicians caring to become good trainers, because most of them have never been taught how to teach. It takes the junior technicians investing in their own learning. And I think it actually takes some client buy-in as well, so that the clients understand there will be training conducted on your site. It may periodically look like everyone is just standing around in a group, but this is an important part of our company's commitment to safety and advancement and professional development for our people. And if everybody buys in and you bake this in, I believe it can be done. We've seen it be done in other trades. We have not yet created the space for it. Yeah. And it does require effort and it requires time. And so everybody has to be okay with that. The alternative is much slower growth and development, more safety issues. I think it's intuitive at some level, but we still have to really reinforce and validate this for people. So my other big push is that I want to encourage companies that do implement programs to find ways to track the results. For many leaders, training is intuitively important. It's easy to think, yeah, of course, I don't need an untrained person out there. But where is the data that supports it and that says, oh, we had a faster time to resolution on that ticket. Oh, we've had fewer return visits because we fixed it correctly all the way the first time. Oh, they knew what parts they were going to need, so they made sure the truck was stocked, so there were fewer extra trips to the local hardware store. I think there are ways that we can track this and try to create some correlation between higher trained techs and safer and more efficient repair work. So we need that data. That's going to take a few years to normalize and be able to report on, because there's a lot of other variables that can get muddy those waters. But I do believe that if we track it, we will find it. And that will help substantiate and justify for those leaders why it's worthwhile to put money and time into training. That's the last piece. And
gotta have the data.
It's going to take a little while, I think, to get that together. But once we do, it'll be really valuable.
Amanda, this was amazing. If people want to learn more about Amicus O&M Cooperative, you and the work, where should they go?
So the website is probably the first best place, amicusom.com. And, you can follow me on LinkedIn if you want the latest and greatest.
LinkedIn. Yes, I will definitely agree with that. So nice to see you again. I'm so glad we got to spend some time talking today and together at this conference. Once again, to my listeners, thank you for joining us for another episode of The Future of CRE Sustainability. Today with my guest, Amanda Bybee. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.